Coming up on this special season preview edition of CreekCast.
One of the things you've been focusing on this offseason was we were a game, we finished tied for a playoff spot, kind of lost out on a weird tiebreaker there, but ultimately we were 11 points away from going from 5-5 to being 8-2.
Yeah, and that's been the message throughout the off season with our kids, and some of the stuff we've posted, and the phrase that we use is purpose, right? Everything we do has a purpose, and you've got to know your purpose as a player. And we keep going back into that, and the examples are those games that we lost, a lot of that was in our control.
All right, Coach Carter, going into year two, I know that you've probably learned a lot, but what's the thing you've probably learned the most since last year going into your second year?
Man, it's really hard to narrow it down to one thing because there's just so much that goes into the head coach title, along with, I'm still calling offense, still coaching the quarterbacks. So I don't know if I could really narrow it down to one thing. I would say that the most comfortable I am now is just the routine of things after being on the job for over a calendar year now. You're not having to figure things out as you go, this is when you do this, this is when you do this, throughout the off season, getting things prepped for going into the season, whether it be directly football related or whether it be, booster club related or scheduling, ordering gear, that kind of stuff. That's probably made it a lot easier.
Yeah, you've talked a lot to me about that, knowing that this is kind of the second year going around. I mean, I know in my role as well, it's things seem to run a lot smoother when you're kind of have a year under your belt, kind of getting that going. Looking at what y'all were able to accomplish in year one, a lot of positives, but also I know one of the things you've said, one of the things you've been focusing on this offseason was we were a game, we finished tied for a playoff spot, kind of lost out on a weird tiebreaker there, but ultimately we were 11 points away from going from 5-5 to being 8-2.
Yeah, and that's been the message throughout the off season with our kids, and some of the stuff we've posted, and the phrase that we use is purpose, right? Everything we do has a purpose, and you've got to know your purpose as a player. And we keep going back into that, and the examples are those games that we lost, a lot of that was in our control. Whether it be fumble or simple turnover, misalignment, self-inflicted penalties that we have control over, that could have put us in a situation to win those games. And that's what we keep going back into.
So looking at what you got coming into this year, a region that it's got 9 teams in it, so you got an 8-region schedule, got a couple of non-region games to get going. Obviously, we got Northwest, we got Chattooga back on the schedule again for the third year in a row. But this is going to be a pretty stout region. If you look at it on paper, you had 5 teams that made the playoffs last year coming into this region, 6 if you want to throw us in there since we finished tied for a playoff spot. And then you got a team from Sonorville moving all the way down from 4A to 2A. It's going to be a pretty tough region.
Yeah, it doesn't give you a lot of breaks throughout the year. So the thing that we've got to be able to do is there's a handful of those games that you feel like you need to win them. And then there's another handful where we're going to have to play well to win those. So, all we can do is control what we're doing. And in those games, we've got to be able to do it, what we need to do, and control what we can control. But it's exactly what you said. I feel like you've kind of got Rockmart that's separated themselves from the rest of the pack, and then you've got a lot that could happen on a week-to-week basis. But we're going to have some breaks. We've got to avoid the injury bug this year. We're thin in a couple of spots. We're inexperienced in some spots. We like the talent there, but you just hope that inexperience doesn't rear its ugly head.
So let's talk about the roster personnel here. Small senior class, especially compared to the last couple of years. Only 6 seniors. couple of key contributors coming back with that senior class, but ultimately you're going to be relying on large junior and sophomore classes this year. Talk about kind of how you develop that talent into production on the field.
Well, obviously it doesn't start right now. It started a year, 2 years ago with coaching those guys hard, having them in our system. One of the big benefits, like our sophomore class right now, was one of the first ones that we really were digging into our middle school program when Coach Wilson was the head coach, and they were running our scheme, and the coaching staff down there with Coach King was doing a really good job. And so they came in as freshmen really familiar with verbiage, so there wasn't a lot of teaching when that stuff goes. It was the physical development of going from middle school to high school. So that's an advantage with that bunch of kids. So hopefully that will start to show up here this year and next year with them. But as far as the rest of it goes, it's probably going to be a fast forward for a few of those guys as far as the speed of the game goes. So hoping that they can use what they learned last year in JV, and a lot of those guys played some special teams or spot played when there were some injuries, or we just needed to get some guys off the field last year. And hopefully they got some valuable experience that they can learn from and are ready to get out there and can speed up that learning curve, especially towards the beginning of the season.
Let's take a look at the offensive side of the ball. This is third straight season. You got a different man under center at quarterback, but as I kind of wrote in our quarterback preview article, that hasn't seemed to phase the team so far. We've had back-to-back Region Offensive Player of the Year at quarterback with Case Kinnaman and Chase Ward, and I know you've got a lot of belief in Waylon Belisle's future and talent here.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's helped us the last couple of years is all of those guys. I've been with them multiple years, off-season fundamental work. So it's made me really comfortable with them, and they're really comfortable with me. So that relationship factor, I think, helps a lot of understanding how they operate, what they're comfortable with, what they're confident in, and what they're good at ultimately. Because that's the nature of the game right now. You got to make that offense work around that quarterback, and he's got to be your guy. We've had some good talent there, and I think we've got some more good talent there too with Waylon. So having them for a few years is really helpful. Me and Waylon have been working together since he was in middle school, so feel really comfortable, and I think it goes both ways with us. So I'm hoping that trend can continue.
Looking at your running back position, you're losing Karen Bradley, who was kind of a bell cow type guy running the football, real physical, and you're losing your other two leading rushers, one of which was Chase Ward. So all three of your top rushers from last year are gone. Not a ton of production coming back at that position. I think Carson only had a little over 100 yards on like 20-something carries from last year. So yeah. What is that going to look like? Is it going to be kind of a more of a running back by committee approach?
I think so, yeah. Carson obviously is the leading with experience and carries coming back to us. He had to play a ton of defense last year at defensive back for us. So it's not like he's a brand new player with no experience. So that's a benefit to us. But he's really accepted that challenge through the offseason and has set some high goals for himself, and has watched the film and been in one-on-one meetings with us and understands, here's your weaknesses, here's where we need you to get better. And I think he's accepted that and ready to roll forward. Another one that's had a really big spring and summer as well has been Chris Ewert. We really hadn't had a home for him on offense because we've needed him on defense and special teams the last couple of years. But he's really committed himself to the weight room and the speed and conditioning aspect of things, and gotten himself a step quicker, and really seems to be excited about the opportunity to carry the ball some and help us out in our run game production.
Now, I know you mentioned too the way that you're gonna kind of design the offense this year is you're gonna have some guys that are maybe not necessarily designated running backs, but will have the opportunity to carry the ball.
Yeah, I think guys like Andrew Russell and Tyler Douglas are going to be key guys that we use there. Carson also has a similar skill set to them that we want to get them the ball out in space, play them in some slot stuff because of their skill set. Those guys, if we're just trying to run them in between the tackles, they can do it, but that's not really featuring their skill set and not helping our offense the best way that we could. So getting them in space and giving them the opportunity to carry the ball and catch the ball and be explosive players in that way for our offense is going to be really key.
Now let's look at some of your receivers and tight ends, and I think you've even got a couple of fullbacks listed on the roster this year. That's kind of new. Last year you didn't have anyone designated as a fullback; they were more of an H-back position. So talk a little bit about your receivers and your tight ends and your fullbacks.
That's really where some of our inexperience really starts. Young, talented guys, but just unproven. Kobe King is probably the most experienced. But again, he's kind of like Carson Weaver. We had to rely on him so heavily on defense last year, playing corner, that he was really just kind of there for depth on the offensive side. But with Keith Collins graduating, he's going to fill that Z receiver spot, and he's had a really nice spring, really nice summer. One of our most reliable guys, and we think he's got explosive potential too. And after that, you got to feel good about Wyatt Mann, big physical target. Waylon's really comfortable with him, and we're excited about what he can do. I think he can stretch the field like we need him to, and he can make physical catches, run after the catch type stuff. But those two guys got to be some of our leaders as far as leading the team, but also leading us in production too. After that, you got Landon Bryant and Brandon Manus are going to be key contributors, being able to spell those guys and come in and be reliable targets as well. Our tight end position, we kind of took the similar mold that we had last year of using Levi Lowry to personnel him in and out, of taking physical defensive players and plugging them into those spots. And Jackson Lowry and River Shote that have a similar skill set there, where they're physical, they're smart football players, and they've got a good enough skill set where they can help us in the pass game too.
Up front, two big names back, two all-region caliber players with Isaac McGill and Chevy Joyce. And I know in kind of our conversation with Coach E, they're going to be looking at them for leadership because they're going to be breaking in three brand new guys up front.
Yeah, and if anybody's up to the task to do that, those guys can do it. They've played a lot of football. They're completely bought into our program. They're the type of guys that we can hand them a workout, we can hand them a practice script, and walk off the field, and they would go execute it just like if the coach was breathing down their neck. So those are the kind of players you want. So they're going to drag the rest of those guys along whether they like it or not. Fortunately for us, though, we've got such a good microculture in that position group that those guys want to fall in line between those two. So I think if we can withstand the early start part of our schedule and get those guys broke in, adjustment of speed of the game and things that are going to happen throughout the course of the game, I think they're going to progress nicely because of the leadership between those two guys. Because you got Ivan Hernandez, who's a sophomore, who flat gets after it, and he's going to fall right in line there. And then Nicholas Bowman and Kenan Hughes are probably going to be those guys playing the right side of the line who kind of fit that same mold as well. They want to do everything right. They want to please Coach E. And they want to have that microculture as best as they can possibly be and meet that standard. So those are some big things going forward with us. Big question mark there, though, is we've got to get some depth there in that spot because, that's a physical position, and the likelihood that we get some injuries or some guys dinged up throughout the course of the year is a pretty good possibility. So hopefully we can find some guys that can develop behind them and be reliable.
Yeah, and I mean that was the case last year. I know that we wound up having one of our guys that was supposed to be a rising senior had to essentially medically retire due to an injury, and so that you definitely need some depth there. Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. Speaking of needing depth, one of your starting defensive linemen will also be Chevy, and then a couple other guys there. In the spring game, I was blown away by the defensive line. I thought it was what looked like our best position group on the field. Yeah,
I think it definitely is the best unit when you just look at experience and talent together. They've got it. They check all the boxes because we bring Colby Ewart over to play nose, who started 10 games at left guard last year. He put on about 15 pounds of good weight in the off season, moving even better than he already was. And obviously we know what Jackson Lowry and Chevy Joyce did last year. So you've got those three guys, and then Luke Turner, a sophomore, who's had a really good offseason too. Had an injury as a freshman, so he's coming off of that, but he's recovered nicely and will give us some depth at those spots. But yeah, I mean, they move well, they play with great leverage. They're going to be disruptive.
At the linebacker position, you have a couple of guys in the inside linebacker, River Schote, who got some playing time last year, really stepped up in that final game of the season against the Daresville when we had Karam and Nate Tilley go down with injuries. I know Wyatt was kind of in the same boat, stepping up and playing in there. And then you got some other guys that are kind of going to be new, getting some experience this year, but as we've mentioned, are talented.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same song and dance that we've repeated a couple times. Can they develop? Can they take the coaching? Because we know we've got the raw talent there. Branson, Lowry, River Schote at the inside linebacker spots. They're physical. They're smart football players. You just hope that the game doesn't seem so fast for them that they can't just go out there and react and play. Because if they can get to that point, we feel really good about what they're doing there. And then some of the familiar names that we talked about on the offensive side of the ball, playing those outside linebacker spots, and Wyatt Mann. He's got to be really reliable there. He's got a really good skill set for that position too. He's long, he's physical. But Nathan Guess will be a guy that's really got to step up this year. Been a JV player the last couple of years, coming into his junior year, put on some really good weight, runs well. Looking for him to be able to give us some depth there. Brody Howell, another guy, came out from a baseball player who's a really physical, athletic outside linebacker. They're going to give us some good looks there, and we feel good about that position group there.
Probably one of the more experienced groups on the entire team is in your secondary. You got Tyler Douglas back, who started all 10 games last year. You've got Kobe and Carson, who started several games at cornerback positions last year. You got to feel pretty good about your secondary, knowing that you got a lot of experience back there.
Yeah, they're comfortable and confident in what they're doing, and those names you said, they're out there, played a good bit of football for us, and have spent the off season really taking their fundamentals to that next step so that they can be even more confident in what they're doing. And that's exactly where they are right there. And then you plug in Andrew Russell being back with us, and then Zaire Solis has had a really nice offseason. So you feel like we've got three guys there to play safety, and then our corners as well, building some depth with them will be Brandon Manus, being able to plug there. He's just a really reliable football player. We talked about him on the offensive side of the ball, but he'll give us some depth there on the defensive side as well. So yeah, I feel really good about that group. They cover well, they tackle well, so I feel good about what we've got there in those first couple of levels of them.
And then looking at special teams, got a couple of new guys out that will be kicking and punting for you this year, sophomore and a senior.
Yeah. Brett Pauls has come on as a senior. He's a big athletic guy. He's strong in the weight room, and he's confident in himself, and he's done some really good stuff for us so far. Ball comes off his foot really smooth, and he's pretty intense as a kicker too, so we like that about him. He's not afraid to get down and mix it up if need be. So really excited.
Make a tackle on kickoff.
Yeah, he's not afraid to get in there and mix that up. But like I said, he's a big, athletic, pretty physical, imposing kicker if you just look at him. And then the young one, Braden Scoggins, who's really committed himself. He's putting some good muscle on, and takes everything seriously. So I think he's going to develop nicely as well.
Let's look at your coaching staff. Kind of some rearranging and some new additions this year. We talked on a CreekCast earlier this year. We lost kind of one of the longest tenured people in the school here, Michael Bolin, who's taken kind of a better opportunity for him and his family. And we lost a couple of assistant coaches as well, Coach Thomas, who'd been here the last couple of years, as well as Coach Williams. So who have we got coming in, and who's kind of in new roles this year?
Yeah, never easy to replace guys like you're talking about, but I really feel like I hit the jackpot with what we were able to hire. Pretty familiar with Coach Abernathy because he was here during the spring with us, coaching our inside linebackers. and he's doing a really good job with those guys. He'd been a defensive coordinator at the middle school level, been coaching defensive line, so he's got a good understanding of the whole defense. He's a really good teacher and a good motivator as well, so he's a really good blend there and doing a really good job with those guys. Then coaching our corners, Coach Shamar Collier comes to us from Tennessee. He was at a corner at Maryville College. He was actually a couple years older than Coach Thomas, so we're able to get a good reference from him, so that was nice of having somebody that knew somebody. But man, he came in, got him hired late actually. He came in about mid-July and is really doing a nice job with our corners, and that was really what I was hoping to be able to do, was get a true corners guy, because what I think about that position, it's a lot like coaching quarterbacks. If you can find a guy that played that position, that's so important, because there's so many intricacies of that position that you don't know if you didn't play it, that can just be taught because of feel and those sorts of things, and I think he's done a nice job with that. And then lastly, among the new guys, probably a more familiar face than anybody is Coach Will Douglas, who's coaching our running backs. And we knew he'd do a really good job, but I don't know if I knew he'd do as good a job as what he's done. He knows football, he knows our kids, and he's himself. He's not trying to do anything out of his comfort zone or out of his personality, but he's just doing a really good job with our running backs and moving them along and progressing with them. And then as far as moving guys around, Coach Dan Tierney's kind of brought a few more things on. He's still going to be working with our tight ends, but he's also coaching our slot receivers that we mentioned a little bit earlier, of trying to do some different things with those guys. We felt like we needed an experienced guy like him that can just be devoted to them for a certain portion of practice. And then we pulled Coach Brewer from defense, and he's coaching our outside receivers, and he's really excited to be back on the offensive side of the ball and kind of learning something new.
And Coach Hernandez is now outside linebacker.
That's correct. Yeah, I almost forgot about that. He's moved from the corners to the outside linebackers, and he's really comfortable there. He played a similar position to that when he was in high school, so he's got a good understanding of that, and his demeanor really fits that as well.
Obviously, so we've talked personnel, we've talked coaching staff. How are you feeling going into this year? What's the most exciting thing about this group of kids as you head into the 2024 season?
We talked about some of our deficiencies. We're young, we need depth in these spots, but to look at it on a positive note, the kids that we have are totally bought in. They're all about everything that we do. They're totally committed to every aspect of the program, I think, and it shows the way they're progressing. So I think that they're hungry to take that off season and what they've been doing leading up to this point, and kind of make their mark on where this program is. We talked about building the foundation the last few years. Well, it's time to take that next step and be consistent of where we are. And this group's got to be the one to take that next step and prove that that's not just a 1 or 2 year thing. And the way that they've prepared and progressed shows me that I think they're ready to do that.
Do you think that the winning culture that you've been kind of starting to ingrain the last couple of years, as these freshmen, sophomore, these new classes come up and start to integrate themselves into the varsity action, do you think that them seeing that as middle schoolers and now transitioning up to the varsity level, do you think that that's paid off? Do you think that that helps kind of build that culture and buy in a little easier than what kind of some players in the past haven't been able to do, I should say?
Absolutely, because you see it in the way that they prepare now, on a daily basis in the weight room, on a daily basis at practice. But you saw it last year too, because there were some games where when I first got here last year where we might have been down a score or 2 scores early in the game, that you would have just seen us deflate. And that didn't happen last year. We just kept playing because we expected to be in the ball game. So that's bled down through, and you see it in the preparation, but we also see it in the community. Last year was probably not as exciting of a year as far as wins and losses go when you compare it to 2022. But heck, our community involvement and our attendance was probably better than that year. So it shows me that we're making the progress and the strides that we want to.
All right, Coach. That's pretty much all I got for you this time. I think we're we're excited about this year. I'm excited about this year, and I know we can't wait for Friday night to get things going against Northwest Whitfield at home. So best of luck this year, and thank you for sitting down with me once again.
Thanks. Go Colts.